Hey guys, so we're going to still take some notes today, but this time you're going to be doing it through a video instead of hearing me lecture in person. So if you find my voice annoying already, you probably find it a little bit more annoying when it's recorded through a microphone. So here we go. We're going to look at who had the advantage at the start of the war. So we're going to be comparing Great Britain and their resources and their tactics to the Continental Army and their resources and their tactics. So you have a graphic organizer and an index card by now. You're going to work on filling out that graphic organizer, and at the very end you'll answer the last question on the index card, and you'll make sure that your name's on that, and then you give it to the substitute so that I can go through and grade it. So here we go. So the first thing we're going to look at are the numbers. Great Britain had 40,000 troops with possible backup somewhere around 2 months away. Remember, we looked at it's about 6 weeks to travel from one point to the other. So if they're coming from Great Britain, it's about 6 weeks. If they're coming from Africa or even India, it would be a little bit longer. In reality, there's not a whole lot of backup because they only had 98,000 troops worldwide. So you're looking at almost half their troops are already here. To take troops away from India or Africa or Great Britain would actually ruin the ability for them to defend themselves and defend their other colonies. So it was really iffy if they were going to get backup. What they really needed to do was train brand new soldiers and then send them over to the colonies and fight against the Continental Army there. But that takes much longer than a couple of months. They could theoretically pull from the loyalists that were in the colonies, but it's really hard to trust them. I mean, they really look down upon the colonists in general. So to have someone come up and say, yes, no, I'm loyal to the king, I want to fight for the king, they would really put them on a short leash to make sure that they were not actually spies or people who were going to try and sabotage the British Army. So they did use loyalists in the army. Typically they had whole units that were just loyalists, but the commanders would then send the loyalists on the front of the force, hoping that they would get demolished first, and then the real British soldiers would follow up after that. Numbers for the Continental Army? Well, there were 2.5 million people that were living here. As we talked about before, about 1/3 Patriot, 1/3 Loyalist, and 1/3 Neutral, right? These numbers would shift more so to the Patriot side, but not in any huge numbers. But ultimately, even if you take 2.5 million and 1/3 of that, I don't even think I need a calculator to realize that that number is a whole lot bigger than 40,000. So there are a lot of people who are here willing to fight, and even though they don't have experience, which we're going to talk about here in a second, they do have the numbers which will help them. Okay, so now on to the army and how that worked. So Great Britain had a professional army, right? They were drafted, and they would have a lengthy tour of duty. So this might be for 3 years, might be 5 years, might be 7 years, depending on each of the contracts that they had. And then they would be trained just like we train our military today, right? They would go through like a boot camp, and they'd do drills, and they would deploy, and it'd be very similar to the way that the U.S. military works today. They are highly disciplined, well-trained traditional combat. That is lining up in rows, ready, aim, fire, and then charging after the enemy, right? They would not so much as flinched when they were being shot at. That's how highly trained they were. Right? It's what they spent months training on how to do, and some people years. Units are well established. They could work under any officer. So again, think about the military today, the United States military, or even Britain's military today. You have main units, and they are well established and well organized. So think about me. Right? So for myself, I was part of the 2nd Marine Division, which is the big division. So you're looking at thousands and thousands of people who are in a division. Then I was in the 8th Marine Regiment. So regiment's part of the 2nd Marine Division. I was in the 3rd Battalion of the 8th Marine Regiment. And then I was in Lima Company. So Lima Company had about 200 Marines. And then you get to the battalion level, it's about 1,000. And then regiment's about 5,000-ish, and then goes from there. Alright, so they're well established. The officers are, you know who they are. So I had my company commander, we had our battalion commander. It's really well orchestrated and organized, and so if we were fighting and like one of the officers goes down, it'd be no problem for another officer to come in and take their place. With Continental Army, completely non-professional. These people enlisted for 6 months to a year, and that was really it. The government at the time, under the Articles of Confederation, which we will talk about in the next unit, is operating now, but that government did not have the power to draft any troops, so they relied on volunteers and volunteers only. That time period that they would enlist for really only gave them enough time to train, get good, and then go home. Not exactly what you want when it comes to fighting an army. And most of the soldiers were just farmers and hunters. They are completely undisciplined, not really used to fighting a whole lot. And units were formed in each colony, or the militia, and they would only answer to their officers. So if Pennsylvania militia is fighting alongside New York militia in the Continental Army, and the Pennsylvania officer goes down, and the New York officer tries to give them orders, they're not going to listen. So the officers. Officers are from the upper class, wealth, land, political status. Just like Rome had. If you think about Roman officers, same type of deal. They were expected not to be targeted because they're the ones who kept control. So when officers are targeted, that was as like a big no-no. You don't want to do that because then it'd be complete and total chaos. Lord George Germain is the overall commander, but he had never been to North America until 1775, so he is not used to what he is going to have to face. Continental Army, officers come from the upper class, same type of deal. But Continental officers are not treated the same way as Redcoats. Actually, most times they are mutilated. Not most times. Sometimes they're mutilated. That would never have really happened if the British were fighting, like, say, the French. But they were really upset with us, so they saw them as traitors, and they treated them as such. George Washington is Commander-in-Chief, and he can think on his feet, and he knows the terrain, so that's going to definitely give him an advantage. The tactics. So, Great Britain, well-disciplined, civilized warfare. Established lines and formations, just like you've seen in the movies. Guerrilla warfare is allowed. This is unconventional warfare. These are guys who would like hide in the tree lines and ambush and things like that. It was allowed, but it didn't happen very often. However, the modern U.S. Army Rangers comes from Rogers Rangers, who would actually fight for Great Britain. They did not trust the Loyalists. They could totally underestimate us, their enemy. We adapted to civilized warfare to end up fighting good enough against the British, but we are not there yet. When we start out fighting, it's not that great. We use guerrilla warfare, and we use it a lot. We get really, really good at it. There's actually a video that I'm going to show you when I get back tomorrow, to show you how ambushes would have looked like. We also had rifles. Remember, we talked a little bit about rifles before. They have that spiral groove going down the barrel. They're much more accurate than the smoothbore muskets that the British would have been using, and so our guys would target the officers, hoping that their army would basically fall apart, and then we would get the advantage to be able to win the battle. The British did not like this, as we mentioned before, but it was an advantage, and targeting leaders is something that we still do today. If you know who the leader is, you try and take him out, because that hopefully will disorient the enemy. The Navy. I could make so many jokes about the Navy, but I'm not going to, because you probably wouldn't get them. Anyway, Great Britain had the best navy in the world. They have the largest vessel, which is the man of war. That's what the type of ship was called. These ships were 60 meters long. So a meter is about a yard. So you can do the math and see how long that would be. 3 masts. So those are the masts. Those are the things that actually have the sails. So there'd be 3 of them, and then each of those masts would have 3 or 4 sails each. And they could hold 124 cannons. Are you ready to hear about the Continental Army and their navy? Good. We had 7 ships. 7. So, we don't really have a navy. All they could do are hit and run attacks. So, see the navy, go after them, fire real quick, and get out of there. We could not stand toe-to-toe against their navy. Our largest ship was a frigate. Now, Great Britain has frigates as well, but they're a little bit smaller. That's the biggest ship that we've got. Only 45 meters long, 3 masts, and 30 cannons. So again, 124 cannons versus 30 cannons. Good luck. We needed allies. So here's a picture of a British man of war, and here's a picture of a Continental frigate. The size is much, much different. The terrain, so the land itself. So Britain's far from home. Takes a long time to get orders, long time to get additional troops, long time to get supplies. This is our home. We're aided by many small towns and many small shops. We also have spies who know the terrain, are able to move around uninterrupted, and to get information about the British Army, and then get it back to our commander so we can use that to our advantage and fight them on ground of our choosing, rather than Britain choosing the terrain to fight on. The strange thing about this, even with the distance, Great Britain still had a great supply source. They always had enough food, ammunition, and any other military gear they needed. Always ready, always willing to go. But because we had 13 individual colonies who were trying to work together, it just caused constant shortages, and things didn't always work the way they had planned. Ben Franklin at one point actually recommends arming the army with bows and arrows because they did not have enough bullets and gunpowder to use in the muskets. That just goes to show you how desperate they were. They also lacked proper shoes and other equipment. All right, when we talk about Valley Forge, we're going to see what happens to people when they don't have proper shoes. Motivation for this? Well, I think it's pretty simple. The British don't have a real motivation. They don't really care about the colonies. They don't think it's worth fighting over there, but they're sending their troops to fight and die over here anyway. Where for us, we're fighting for independence and personal freedom. So this is very motivating, and a lot of people are now starting to join the cause and want to fight against Great Britain, or at least help in the fight against Great Britain. Alliances? Great Britain had the German Hessian mercenaries. Right, so those are the main people they're going to use, and they have American Indians. Britain's thinking, hey, if we win, then we will keep control of the colonies, and we will not allow them to go past the mountains, which in reality they weren't able to do anyway, but that's what they said. Our biggest ally was France. Now, we don't get France at the beginning of the war. We're on our own at first, but France will become a major ally later on, and it's where we're going to get the majority of our gunpowder. We also used American Indians and said, hey, all those things that happened, that was under Great Britain and the King. If you let us do our thing, then we'll be much nicer to you. We'll talk more about that later on in the year. Okay, so I know we went through that, and I spoke quickly, but you can always pause, rewind, go back, and make sure you get everything, right? Hopefully by now you've answered all the questions that were on the Ed puzzle. So on your index card, I want you to answer this question. So in one complete sentence, just one sentence and one sentence only, which side had the advantage at the start of the war? Be sure to give 3 general reasons to support your point. So let me give you an example. You might say, as you think about last year, you guys compared the Spartans and the people of Athens. So if you thought that Sparta was better than Athens, you might say in a one complete sentence, Sparta was better than Athens because they had a stronger army, women had more rights, and they were able to, I don't know, some other reason. You get the point, right? So here's what I believe. Here are the 3 generic reasons why. Okay, so that's all I'm looking for. One sentence, 3 reasons. Make sure your name is on that, and give it to the substitute. If you finish and there is still time to go, then you need to find something else to work on and be productive. Do not waste time. As a reminder, if your name was written down, you're getting detention. Also, if you haven't watched this video, and, well, you're probably not hearing me right now anyway, so it really doesn't matter. But if you have not watched this video at all, 0, zip, zilch, nada, you have not accomplished what you're supposed to do today, and you were here, you're getting detention because you were wasting time and not doing what you're supposed to do. Obviously, you're watching this video because you can hear me saying that right now, so you don't have anything to worry about. But for the people who are not watching this, they have a problem. Okay, I guess I'll shut up now, and you guys can, well, hopefully be done with all your work, and I will see you guys tomorrow.